Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and happy Love Month. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to First Metro Securities 4Q25 Philippine Economic Insights, presented in partnership with Ateneo Center for Economic Research and Development. For those who may be new to ACERD, it is an academic think tank from the Ateneo de Manila University dedicated to advancing policy recommendations that foster industry competition and sustainable economic growth. My name is Ange Bakay, Equity Research Associate from First Metro Securities Research, and I will be hosting today's session. This afternoon, we are privileged to have Dr. Luis Damlao, who will walk us through the Philippines' fourth quarter GDP results and overall economic performance. He will also share ACERD's outlook and insights for the remainder of the year. As a brief background, Dr. Luis Damlao is a senior fellow of the Ateneo Eagle Watch and the former dean of the John Gokongwei School of Management at the Ateneo de Manila University. His expertise spans macroeconomics and international financial economics. Before we begin, let me quickly run through a few house rules. First, all attendees will remain muted during the presentation. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box and we will address them during the Q&A portion later. Lastly, please note that the views and opinions expressed during this webinar are those of ACERDS and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of First Metro Securities and the Metrobank Group. So without further ado, I will now pass on the floor to Dr. Luis Damlao.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. So I'll turn off my video to save some bandwidth there. Okay. And then I'll share my presentation. Ange, am I good to go?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So again, thanks for having me. So this is my usual template. So I'll go with my usual. The usual template is I talk about the GDP growth. Again, why? Quoting from Angela Merkel, growth isn't everything, but without growth, everything is nothing. Then I'll talk about inflation. I'll take the minimalists adage, which is less is more. I'll talk about unemployment, quoting Pope Francis, causing job losses means causing grave social harm. And then I'll talk about finance, international, public, and very briefly about private finance. And then I'll quote John F. Kennedy. The time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. And basically, we will see why I specifically I quote JFK. Then I'll briefly talk about corruption, uh, quoting Shakespeare's Hamlet. There's something rotten in the state of Denmark. Okay, so quoting again from Angela Merkel, we need three things above all. First, growth. Second, growth. And third, growth. Growth isn't everything, that's true, but without growth, everything is nothing. Without growth, we can either ask the have-nots to remain miserable, or we can take from the haves and give it to the have-nots. The only way we can give to the haves and the have-nots at the same time is only if there's growth. So the GDP growth slumps to a low of 3% in the fourth quarter of 2025. So it's surprisingly lower, at least for us. And then we'll look at it in perspective, GDP now in the last 20 years. And then we will look at the benchmark business as usual. That is what would happen to the growth the rest of the year if there is no extra shocks, if we do the same thing over and over again, show up to work 9 to 5, do nothing different, do not do anything differently. This is the growth. What I have in dots are the natural growth or the steady state growth or the equilibrium growth. And what we see here is that during elections, presidential elections specifically, there have been historically spikes in growth. So, for example, this is the election of President Arroyo. The next spike. And then, of course, there is the global financial crisis, which started in the U.S. And then you have the presidential election of President Pinoy Aquino. Uh, and then this one is quite important. What happened in 2011 was President Aquino basically uh, suspended all government contracts, uh, suspecting that all contracts signed by the previous administration were tainted with corruption. And it hurt the economy indeed. Then you have the president election of President Duterte. Then, of course, the COVID-19, the presidential election of President Marcos Jr. And now what I have here is we are in the midst of corruption scandal. So now it's deja vu 2011 again. And now the growth is 3%, exactly the same as what happened in 2011. We now have a negative output gap of 3%. That is to say that equilibrium, potentially we would have grown by 6%, but instead we grew by only 3%. These are the average growths per administration. The average growth during President Arroyo was 4.8%. The average growth during President Aquino was 6.2%, 3.9% during President Duterte, and so far 5.5% per year in the present administration, President Marcos Jr. This is the business cycle of income. What would happen to income if if uh, uh, if basically we do everything routinely? You'd see here the red ones are the actual predictions and the blue are the actuals. So, for example, in 2025, we expected it to grow by 4.7%, which is quite pessimistic already, and it turned out to be even worse, growing by only 4.4% for the year 2025. And you'd see here, it's almost across the boards. For example, agriculture, we expected to be 3.3%. It's only 3.1%. Industry, 2.3%, only 1.5%. And service sector, 6%, only 5.9%. What matters, so it's across the board, but the one that actually had the biggest contraction in 2025 fourth quarter, there was an actual negative 7% growth of the construction. And with that amount of contraction, it actually spilled over across all sectors and subsectors. So what we will see, the fourth quarter was 3%. So it will gradually pick up to 3.4, 4.3, 6.2, and 6.1%. But for the year, it's going to be 5%, which is less than the steady state of 6%. So annual growth, you would have a negative output gap. And that will miss, of course, the government target of between 5.5% and 6.5%. The last column indicates basically of course, these slides will be shared by our colleagues in First Metro. But what these slides show is the number of years each sector and subsector would double. So this is for planning. For example, if one is in the accommodation and food service, it will double. The industry will double in 6 years. That means if you are in that subsector, if you're not able to double your asset within 6 years, that means you are being left behind. So the one will grow faster are accommodation and food service, transport and storage in 7 years, and then finance doubling in 9 years. This is very small, but I'll indicate it anyway. I said that the one that will grow the fastest is accommodation, and accommodation is here. The present is blue, and the red is the what would happen 10 years ago, and it will grow the fastest. But nevertheless, what you see here is it would still be relatively small compared to, say, wholesale and retail. Uh, Transport, again, transport will grow also fast, but relatively behind. And then, of course, finance. Uh, Finance is right there. So finance is one of the so it will grow one of the third fastest growing, and at the same time, it will be the third biggest subsector. Uh, Construction. So what I have here is you'd see here is that the fourth biggest is agriculture, the blue ones, the fourth biggest. But what happens the next 10 years is agriculture will grow measly. It will be taken over by construction. So the red one, the red bar will be greater now for construction, professional and business services, uh, real estate, public administration, and this one, transport and storage. This is the business cycle of expenditure. Again, the slower than expected consumption. So consumption, we expected it to grow by 4.7%. It actually grew by 4.6% only for year 2025. Government expenditure, we projected to grow by 9.7%. It turns out to be 9.1%. But the one with the biggest one is investment, a contraction actually. So we expected it to grow at 2.2%, but it actually contracted. So it grew by negative 2.1%. And the one that counts the most, so it's across the board, but the one that counts the most in terms of expenditure in the fourth quarter of 2025, construction had the negative growth of 12%, and that spilled over across expenditures. Again, the fourth quarter is 3%. It will gradually pick up to 3.4%, 4.3, 6.2, and 6.1. So that on an annual basis, the growth is going to be 5%, which is less than the steady state or equilibrium growth of 6%. One thing to notice here is that we have the net primary income from abroad. So as a proportion of GDP, this one in the last row, this is the amount of foreign currency that comes in because of remittances, whereas the amount of foreign currency that goes out as a proportion of GDP is the net exports. So this is foreign currency that goes out as a proportion of GDP because of trade deficit. And in absolute value, for example, for 2026, 15 is greater than 9.3. So we expect in that sense more foreign currency to come in. And that gives credence to our confidence in the peso. Again, the one that will double fastest is the gross capital formation. Indeed, gross capital formation will have the biggest leap for the next 10 years. But keep in mind that still it would be heavily a consuming economy. So it's consumption. Consumption will grow, but not as fast as capital formation. But still, consumption would still have the biggest share. This is the World Bank income classification. So what we have is per capita income is $4,470 per year, and the classification to be an upper middle income is 4,496. So we just missed it by $26 in 2024. But in 2025, that's just $26. If this grows by only 2%, then we will be reclassified as upper middle income soon. Of course, that is based on the assumption that upper middle income threshold will not move because sometimes it moves. I'll now go to inflation. The inflation rate hits 11-month high of 2%, but still very low. Quoting the minimalists adage, because less is more. So with inflation of 2%, we look at it how bad or good it is from a historical perspective. What are the causes? Where on regional basis and looking forward? So inflation historically, basically, shocks are usually externally driven and supply side. For example, this spike here in inflation of about 35%, that was the first oil crisis of the 1970s. Then you have the second oil crisis. This is the taking over of the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. Uh, this one, before 1985, I have it in blue because it is not uh, externally driven, but it is self-inflicting, and that is the Philippine debt crisis. The global recession of Kuwait, global recession and invasion of Kuwait in 1991, and then the Asian financial crisis and El Nino in 1998. Then the Iraq War, and then also part of that is self-inflicting because of the introduction of the value-added tax, which was needed. Then we have the global financial crisis that started in the US. This is self-inflicting. We start importing rice, uh, forcing, pretending that we can take care of ourselves and our rice. No, that's not true. We still need to import. And then the invasion of Ukraine, and then the increase in the price of rice worldwide. So now inflation is 2%. It's benign relative to, if you think of it historically. Uh, for every administration, average inflation has decreased except for President Duterte. For example, 6.2% average during President Marcos Sr., 11.9% during the time of President Corazon Aquino, 7.8% during the time of President Ramos, 4.4% during the time of President Arroyo, and then 2.7% during the time of President Pinoy Aquino, and then picked up during President Duterte, 3.9%, and so far, our average inflation is 3.2% under President Marcos Jr. In terms of inflation per major commodities, so from July of last year, that's when inflation was lowest, around about 1.4%, and it started to pick up, and it is now at 2%. In terms of the main drivers, the one that has a big weight is food and non-alcoholic beverages. Will see a deflation in rice, so a decrease in the price of rice, but also an inflation in fish. Transport also has a big weight, and you'd see here it's actually a negative inflation or a deflation, and there is still a negative pressure for transport to to be mild in terms of inflation, because in terms of the global price of oil, it actually went down from $77 per barrel to $62 per barrel. That is February last year on February this year. So what are the sources of inflation? We talk about deflation. Deflation is close to 9% for rice, actual, so decrease in price, and then operation and transport equipment. So that is a deflation. And then the driver of higher prices is fish, a 7% inflation, and food and beverages at 4% inflation. In the calculation of the inflation, which is 2%, so the target is 3%. So my obligation, in a sense, is to explain why it is 2%, not 3%. Considering the weights, so the target is 3%, but the weights of fish, their inflation, fish, food, electricity, because of those, inflation would have been 3.4%. The contribution of rice is negative 1%, so inflation would have been 2.4%. And then the three others, which are personal transport, meat, and passenger, that has a contribution of negative 0.4, so that inflation is 2% as what we have. We have about 55 items in the basket of goods that compose the consumer price index. How many do we have here? We have 4, we have 7 here. So the rest, about 48 of them, they balance it. balance out to 3 to 2%. If not for rice, inflation would have been 3%. So it would have been, inflation would have been at target at 3%. In terms of the price of rice, so the rice is important because it has the third biggest weight in the consumer of in the CPI, and you see here it started, price of rice has started to pick up, but on January it's still on the negative side, so a deflation of 7%. So that would put a pressure for inflation to be mild. Another one that has a big weight is oil, which affects transport and electricity. And would see is year on year, February 6 on February 2025 to February 4, 2026, it's actually gone down from $77 to 62 uh, uh, dollars per barrel. So therefore, looking forward, the latest inflation last January is 2%. We expect it to pick up this February to 2.2%, but for the rest of the year, it would be a mild 1.9%, missing the target of government of between 2 to 4%. Of course, this is as if there is no, barring any policy rates change. So inflation basically is fish, and deflation in rice, transport, and personal transport equipment. The next one is I'll talk about the unemployment, because causing job losses means causing grave social harm, quoting from Pope Francis. So what is the 4.4% unemployment in December in reference to the population? What do official rates mean in headcounts? So we approximate that there are 114 million in the population of the Philippines. Okay. Of the 114 million and 9,000, 33,761,000 are younger than 15 years old, and therefore we cannot count them as part of the labor market. That leaves us with 80,248,000, 15 years old and above. Of those, we have the non-participants, which is 28,562,000. So these could be the retired people. They're over 15 years old, but they're no longer participating. Or this could be full-time students, 15 years old. So late high school to college students who are full-time, over 15 years old, but not participating in the labor market. And there are others, of course, that just are not participating. That leaves us, so the data says 64.4%, that's the labor force participation. Therefore, that leaves us with 51,687,000. Of those 51,687,000, the unemployed, it says here, unemployment rate is 4.4%. That leaves us with 2,260,000 that are unemployed. I'm always encountered the question that why is the unemployment very low and lower than the likes of OECDs, for example, United States, the Eurobloc, and even Canada. And okay, so employed 95.6%. So that gives us with 49,427,000. Again, I encountered questions why the unemployment rate is too low. People cannot reconcile them, and it's lower than the United States, Canada, and the Eurobloc, for instance. So the studies have indicated that unemployment benefits motivate workers to be active in the labor force and can help keep workers in the labor force. Unfortunately, the strategy of our government in terms of transfer is unconditional transfer or unconditional ayuda. If the transfer is unconditional, then they don't have to be working. They don't have to basically unemployed. They don't have to report that they're unemployed. And what happens is, or they don't have to be looking for a job. And for that reason, because they're not looking for a job, they become non-participants, they become not unemployed. So lower participation lowers unemployment rate. So they don't participate because they don't have to be unemployed to be receiving ayudas or unconditional transfers. If I simulate it, so for example, the labor force participation rate is 64.4%. If I raised it to 65.4, unemployment rate will no longer be 4.4%. It's now going to be 5.8%, which is now at par, a bit higher than OECD's and the US, and that's a little believable, a little more believable. Of course, of all those employed, the underemployment is 8%. That leaves us with 3,932,000. So these are part-time workers who need to work more hours to earn more, or it could be street vendors working more than 8 hours a day but not making enough. Those are underemployed. That leaves us with, for lack of some technical term, fully employed of 44,496,000. Of course, some of them, you have the OFW who are not part of the labor force because they are abroad. These are the latest numbers, but it could be bigger. That's 2,160,000. Employment rates in terms of headcount. So December 2024 to December 2025, that's the latest data. So in rates, unemployment increased by 1.3%, by 1.3% from 3.1 to 4.4%. The underemployment decreased by 2.9 from 10.9% to 8%. And then in terms of headcounts, basically 758,000 previously employed lost their jobs. 631,000 of them are looking for jobs and has not found any jobs. And 128,000 of them have left the labor force. In terms of underemployment, there is now 1,549,000 previously underemployed became fully employed, which is a reduction, an underemployment of 28%. But this one, the underemployment numbers, they tend to fluctuate. It can easily reverse by January. In terms of sectoral and subsectoral, so the main sectors are agriculture, industry, and services. So a total loss of 758,000, job loss of 758,000, and the most of the losses are in industry. So that's 822,000. In terms of the subsectors, the biggest employers account for 49% of employment. These are wholesale and trade, agriculture, and construction. Of the three, they lost a net of 785,000 jobs, but again, mostly from construction. Same goes with growth. The reason why we have slowed down is construction. So that's consistent. Construction actually lost 550,000 jobs. Among the biggest winners, which are administrative and support services, these are IT and business process management, accommodation and food services, that's restaurant, and then education. There's a total gain of 906,000 jobs. The biggest losers are construction, transport and storage, and fishing. It amounts to 1,066,000, and more than half of the job loss, once again, is from construction. So it's a recurring theme that construction is the one that's dragged down the GDP and jobs. So now I go to finance. We will see the time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. So in terms of international finance, I would be optimistic in terms of the peso. So depending on the theory, basically, the peso would actually move sideways with respect to the dollar and with respect to all the major currencies in the world. One of the reasons why the peso is going to be strong is because of its relatively the Philippines inflation. So I'll give you a personal experience or feeling or expectation that When I was in college, I never thought that inflation in the Philippines would be less than that of the US. What's happening these days is something special because inflation in the Philippines is less than that in the US, Eurobloc, Japan, and Great Britain all at the same time, or UK all at the same time. We also see here, so we tend to look at the peso relative to the dollar. And that this is what's happened year on year. Okay, February 4 on February 4, actually it's the peso has gotten even stronger these past few days. But you would see here, this is what happens if we go to the mostly traded currency in ASEAN, which is Singapore Sing dollar. The pattern is the same in relation to, so the Sing dollars relative to the dollar, the pattern is similar to that of the Philippines. Then if I look at the Japanese yen, which is the most traded currency in the whole of Asia, the pattern is quite the same also in terms of the dollar. The mostly traded currency in the world, of course, is the US dollar. But the second mostly traded currency in the world is Europe. And the pattern is no different from ours. So all these four currencies have the same pattern. So most of the time, it's not the peso that's weakening or peso that's gaining strength, but it is more of the dollar affecting all these currencies at the same time. So yes, the peso per dollar is probably it's very low these days, comparatively low compared to a few weeks ago, but it's not the peso strengthening per se, but rather it is the dollar that's weakening across all these currencies around the world. Okay, this is the gross international reserve. So how much reserve do we have? And of course, the import cover at the solid line. So for example, the import cover of 5.9 in 2008 means our reserve is equivalent to 5.9 months of import. Then it dropped because of the global financial crisis in 2018. And then here, lowest since the global financial crisis. This is because of the build. And then in December 2020, it went up to 110 billion, an import cover equivalent to more than 1 year. And then what I have here is December, the gross international reserve is at record high, which is $111 billion, equivalent to 7.4 months of import. So just to a benchmark, the generally accepted healthy import cover is 6 months. So in terms of the reserve, what we're saying here is the central bank basically has a record high of $111 billion of reserve, that if it sees that there is unhealthy trading or an unhealthy speculation on the peso, it can actually defend the peso with its $111 billion of reserve army of dollars. Okay. So that again, that means in terms of international finance, I am on the optimistic side. Now we look at the net primary income from abroad and the trade deficit. You'd see here, basically the blue line is the foreign currency that comes in because of remittance. And then the red one is the foreign currency that goes out because of the trade deficit. In absolute value, you'd see here as a percentage of GDP, it's 14.4 and it's greater than the 10 that I have here. That means, again, more this year or even the past few months, more dollars or more foreign currency has been coming in than going out, which leads to the credence that we are positive that the peso in itself will hold its stand. I now go to the public finance. This time, so from me being optimistic about international finance, I must say that public finance is something that I'm not very optimistic. We are not very optimistic about. So we have a history of budget deficits. We only have budget surplus about 4 years, 1994, 95, 96, and 97. And then the Asian financial crisis, and it has been negative all along. However, uh, uh, it's fine to have a deficit, but the general standard is for as long as the deficit, the budget deficit is less than 3% of GDP, it is okay. And what we see here is lately with president with the even before the pandemic, the deficit has already breached the 3% threshold. And of course, it peaked after the pandemic, and now still it is still the deficit is still above 3% of GDP. Why has the deficit been down? We give credit. I give credit to our tax collecting tax revenue agencies, because as a proportion of GDP, they have actually been up compared to, for example, those years of President Arroyo. So it's relative. So our government basically is collecting. The problem is the expenditure has been up, and that's why with the big deficits. Now, what happened during the pandemic is it spiked to from 16% to something like 23% or 24%. But that is fine because that was during the pandemic. The humanitarian thing to do was to spend. However, if we define the end of pandemic as 2022, and what happened after 2022 is expenditure has not gone down, so we are still spending as if there is still a pandemic. So spending during pandemic and then spending as if we are still in a pandemic. And the reason why I called President John Kennedy was the time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining, the financial sun is shining, and we should be fixing our public finance, and we are not fixing public finance. This is in terms of our debt, to emphasize again the problem with our public finance. You'd see here before the pandemic is as debt grew from somewhere around 4 trillion to 8.2 trillion before the pandemic, our debt to GDP growth, our debt to GDP has declined from 87 to 42%, which means we did not pay the debt because the debt was increasing, but we did not go through some austerity. We did not raise taxes, or we did not save our expenditure, but rather what we did was we outgrew the economy. So yes, the liability has increased, but the asset increased even more, so as to reduce the debt to GDP ratio. After what we have now, however, is from 8 trillion debt prior to pandemic, it is now 17 trillion pesos, close to 18 trillion. A debt to GDP ratio of 63%. And the global standard is if you reach the 60% threshold, you will be on the watch list of the multilateral financial institutions. However, this is below the Reinhardt-Rugoff threshold of 90%. What that means is in their study, they find that countries with debt to GDP ratio of higher than 90% tend to have slower growth, and it is lower than the global debt to GDP ratio of 95%. I say here 3 down, X to go. Why do I say that? Because previously, the debt to GDP ratio was 42%. Because of pandemic, we have 3 years of spike in the debt, which is the humanitarian thing to do because of people losing their jobs, okay, people starving. But what happened after the pandemic is 2022, and pandemic, and what happened was that the debt to GDP ratio remains the same as if we are still a pandemic. So that's 3 years of poor public finance. So I say 3 down, so 3 years of poor public finance, which is unsustainable. X to go. We don't know what that X is. That means X basically is the time in which the economy, we will go back to 1986 because this is not sustainable. Hopefully, there's plenty of time to reverse course, or hopefully the next administration will reverse course in terms of its spending pattern or in terms of its public financing. I go now to private finance. Private finance, because I'm always asked about the situation about private financing. This is your debt. Basically, what I have here is it's at a record high of about 3.5 trillion pesos private consumer loans. However, However, you'd see here is it is just about less than 13% as a proportion. That has to do a lot with credit card receivables. The red ones you'd see spiking. But in terms of the GDP, the entire debt is only equivalent to less than 13%. Less than 13%. And to put it in perspective, uh, uh, many developed countries have the private consumer loan to GDP ratio has been for many countries 80% and above. So we are safe in terms of private finance. So I'm positive in terms of private finance. The last section is I'll talk about very briefly corruption. Quoting from Pope Francis, corruption is paid for the poor. What I have here is this is the on the horizontal axis is the corruption index. The higher you are in the horizontal axis, the cleaner is your government. So for example, I think this is one of the Scandinavian countries, Finland, and then this is one of the African countries. And then what I have here is the per capita income. And I think we see the pattern. It's obvious. So the bigger the corruption, the cleaner an economy is, the higher is the per capita income. So I'll do the statistics. I'll spare you with the statistics. But basically, what we find is that 1 point downgrade in corruption index is associated with 6% lower per capita income. So the Philippines is right here. And what's happening to the Philippines the past few years is that it's actually getting worse. And if that is 35.5 going to 33.5, that's 2%, that's 2 point downgrade in index. And that means the 2 point downgrade in index with per capita income of $3,985 in 2024, the 2 point downgrade in corruption index approximately cost the average person $480. So the average person watching here have lost 28,000 pesos because only in 2024 because of the corruption. Then why do I say something is rotten in the state of Denmark? Well, something is rotten out there. I'll spare you. We don't have to read this whole thing. I'll just summarize, but this is one of the news. AC Energy Inc., a unit conglomerate of Ayala Corp, completed a 330 megawatt solar farm, one of the biggest in Southeast Asia. So imagine that one of our biggest conglomerate producing one of the biggest solar farm in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam. And then the construction of the 294 million solar project, which started in January last year, took 14 months. So I doubt if we would see such projects in this country finishing in 14 months, and they employed approximately 2,000 workers throughout the construction phase. Who financed them? One of the biggest banks in the Philippines, Rizal Commercial Banking Corp, was the sole lender providing a non-recourse project financing of $232 million. Here's another one. Manila Water signals entry to Mexican market via Agua de Puebla, which means Manila Water. I think it's a household name among our guests today. they're actually not investing here, they're investing elsewhere, and that is in Mexico. So what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that because the fiduciary responsibility of corporations is to protect the best interest of their investors. Many are present here in this webinar. But the fact that the corporations are doing their responsibility on foreign soil must mean that something is rotten on domestic soil. There is something that we academics are not seeing. There's something out there that statisticians or data is not showing. So to wrap up, the growth, the 2026 growth will be 5%, a 1% improvement from 2025, and a 1% short of the potential output of 6%. Inflation, barring rate cuts and unexpected external shocks, average inflation will be 1.9%, below the 2 to 4% target range. So we are a bit optimistic on that. Unemployment rate comparable to OECD rates and at full employment, we are relatively optimistic about the employment situation. International finance, the Philippines will move sideways. A lot of times it is the question of the USD and not the Philippine peso movement. We are optimistic about the peso. Public finance, 3 down, X to go. So this is one thing that we are pessimistic about. 3 years of wrong unmanaged public finance. It's a matter of time. Hopefully, we can reverse course before that X comes to fruition. Corruption, it is out there, economically costly, and I need not say more because most of our audience here, I think, know as much about I do about corruption. So thank you so much. Thank you for having me here. So I guess I'll take questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Dumlao, for your presentation. I'll give you time to catch your breath for a while. In the meantime, before we move on to the Q&A, we'd like to invite our audience to type in your questions in the Q&A box. We'll do our best to address as many of them as possible. Also, to make our webinars even better, we'd appreciate just 2 minutes of your time to scan the QR code in your screens. We'd love to hear from you on how we can improve our webinars. Simply scan the QR code on your screen to get started. Also, for those asking, we will be uploading a recording of our webinar on our YouTube account. That's First Metro Securities, so you can watch it at your convenience. All right, I think we already have questions here. I'll bring you back on the floor, Dr. Dumlao, while I read the first question. So here we have, I continue to struggle with 6% growth capacity. We've missed it every year over the last 3 years, while Vietnam is growing at 8%.
Sorry, I didn't get the question. Sorry.
Okay, I'll read that once again.
Yes, sure.
I continue to struggle with 6% growth capacity. We've missed it every year over the last 3 years, while Vietnam is growing at 8%.
Yes, we continue to miss them, and unfortunately, we also miss them, especially this year. And in 2026, we expect that to continue. But it's the question. Well, basically, it has to be the private sector that runs the economy, not the past few years where they think the government is the one that can solve the problem.
Got that, Dr. Dumlao. We move on to the next question here. Is it still logical to assume construction will grow that fast, given that there is an excess inventory in condos and government has limited capacity to spend?
So I'll show you what happened here. It's so it's again, I said it's 2011 all over again because President Aquino stopped all these projects, suspecting that the previous administration's commitments were all corrupt, and it actually hurt the economy. And now we are in the midst of a scandal, and then they have stopped all this construction, and now it's the same mistake, -3%. Something to think positively about is after that, uh, the Aquino's administration learned its lesson. It became more selective. It's not across the board corrupt. Some it continued to spend, and the economy a bit recover. So if it happened 2011 and it happened this year, it's possible that we can recover the same way that we did from 2011 to 2012 and early 2013. So hopefully our government is able to implement in such a way that it is able to discriminate wisely which ones are tainted with corruption and which ones are clean.
All right, we move on to the next question. Any idea on government direction when it comes to R&D? Your slide a while ago, I think, indicated that 58 years of breeding, etc. This is food related, and we have major problem in food supply.
You said research and development, right? R&D.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, it's been a given weakness for us for several years. The research and development. That's why we have to rely on the private sector. Private sector is the one that and the R&D that we're having is basically on it's in uh, IT and business process management. That's where it's been happening, and it is the private sector. That's the engine, not government. Government basically, we'd like to think that its role is to facilitate a competitive environment so as to induce R&D in the private sector.
Also, I guess in relation to that, someone also typed in this one, Philippines being an archipelago with vast swatches of land should have food dependency. Rice and seafood should not be key drivers for inflation. So maybe any thoughts on what the government is doing regarding this one, maybe long term? Or will we be continuing to depend on OFW remittances?
We do not our OFW remittance is growing by less than 3% per year. It has slowed down. And for the next few years, we will rely less on them. Why do income come in? It's one of the reason could be that because of online banking. It's not going through proper channels of remittance anymore, and that's why it's not being recorded. But there's another one. The other one is the major sources as uh, it's the RI, remote intelligence. You have digital content creation, of course. I call them the W8ers, W8. What is the W8? Is the uh, federal form that is filled out by small business and businesses in the US. So they have equivalent form of course, in Europe and Japan. And what they do is by filling up these forms, what they pay the Filipinos working remotely here for US businesses abroad, basically they become part of the cost, and they become tax deductible for federal tax. And that's that's so much dollars that's coming in, and then you have the retired, and then you have the digital content, the digital nomad workers. What are the digital nomad workers? These are workers, foreign workers that are working online but choose to live here in the Philippines to do their job online for other companies abroad. So these are the main. So we have some new heroes that's coming in, and we are in a sense in a race to capture which ones are the new ones. So imagine 1987, 1988, when there's no data on OFW yet. And then we see that it's a new phenomenon that's going on. there is also a new phenomenon that's going on. So much dollars coming in, and there are new ones that we are trying to capture. Now we're not so much more of the OFW.
Okay. Also, if you can share, someone is asking about the rice negative inflation. Maybe you can share how is this computed?
Oh, it's the price index basically. The price is there's the rice. So it's gone down. It's gone down. So what happened here is I start this with 2022 for a purpose because that's the time the promise of the 20 peso per kilo started. When the administration. And in terms of the price, what you'd see here is actually it went up and it went up and then it started to go down. And then because of the 20 peso per kilo subsidies, that's part of it. But it started to go up now. So now it is still year on year, January on January, it's still negative 7%. So if you imagine this pattern, keep on going. So this one will settle probably sometime like in July or August or late this year before inflation in the Philippines starts to be positive again. But for now, for the next few months, it will continue to be negative inflation or deflation.
All right. The next few questions will be on foreign exchange.
Uh-huh.
First, yeah, hello. Does foreign exchange fluctuations affect inflation percentage? For example, purchase of imported products.
Okay, the one that foreign exchange affect the most uh, is basically that's the reason I look at rice because rice is also imported. So if there is a peso depreciation, then rice would become more expensive, and that would directly because we also rely on imported rice that would directly affect our households. The other one is oil because that affects electricity uh, and transport. So that's why I looked at it, but it's still on the negative side year on year from February 2025 to February 2024. It's gone down from $77 per barrel to $62 dollars per barrel. Should there be a deflation, a depreciation of the peso, however, that means uh, the oil is going to be more expensive, and that would directly hit our small businesses and households, precisely because we rely on transport uh, and electricity.
All right. And then another one here. How does your peso projection compare with the McDonald's price theory?
I'm sorry, McDonald's.
Yes, that was what was written here on the chat box. Not sure
Okay,
if,
okay, maybe I just didn't read it. Okay, I hear it.
yeah, let me read that again. How does your peso projection compare with the McDonald's price theory?
Oh, the
Admittedly,
Big
I'm not.
Mac index. The Big Mac index.
Okay.
Okay. Uh, the Big Mac index it does well sometimes, but sometimes it's not the perfect thing. Because culturally we are different in terms of our taste. Burger is a staple food but in the US, but that's not to us. So maybe the better one would be basketball index because culturally speaking, the Filipinos have the same taste as Americans in terms of that sport. So theoretically, the Big Mac index is something I would not rely on. I would look at others. Uh, for example, our reserve, uh, the inflation across the board, and our inflation is less than that in the US. Uh, Reserve, and then actually the net primary income of abroad versus how much dollars go out. So, and in all of these indicates that the peso is on the strong side. It's a question of external shocks or something happening to the dollar that would either make us passive victims or passive beneficiaries.
All right, another question here. Do you have info for China currency against US dollar?
Okay, that we don't forecast that. And the reason we don't forecast that is because it is not market determined. All econometrics model will fail because it is basically artificially set by the Chinese government.
All right, moving on to the next topic. Someone's asking about capital formation. Why do you
Mhm.
think this will be the fastest growing area over the next few years? Considering the negative print last year, what will drive this growth?
The one that's actually growing the past few years in is intellectual property production. That's the one that's been growing. Uh, and then actually the fastest one, and actually intellectual property production will double in 5 years. So a lot of this is in, once again, IT and business process management. And then you have what do you call it, uh, the intellectual property rights. It's right there. That's where the spending has been in terms of investment.
All right, on to the next question. How much of the BSP foreign currency reserve is gold? Gold has gone up a lot, which is probably one reason why coverage is up this much.
So the generally accepted proportion of the reserve is 1/6 or 15% of the reserve. And in terms of our gross international reserve, it's approximately that, around 18 billion. So mostly it's in foreign investment, but our reserve, it's it's uh it's at par. So what is the proportion of our reserve that is in gold? Uh, it is at par with the generally accepted standard or convention, which is 1/6 of the reserve.
Got that. Next question. What are the reasons why public finance is still elevated after the pandemic and at the present time?
It's all these populous. The ayuda keeps coming. What else? And then you have the Pantawid. I'm just an example. The Pantawid Pasada program, which gives about 5,000 pesos per public utility, and there are hundreds of thousands of them. Uh, and then what is the rationale for that? Because the price of oil, they say, is up. Uh, and then it doesn't make sense also because we are forcing them to use clean energy, and yet we are subsidizing them to use uh, fossil fuel. So it's a subsidy on both ends that doesn't make sense, subsidizing, forcing them to go clean, and at the same time subsidizing them for the use of fossil fuel. So both of that cost money. And then you have, of course, I'm going to give you an example, the uh, the public transportation, the MRT, for example. They have asked to raise the fare so that they would get their fare returned to the business, and the government had said no. Uh, and the MVP group have even threatened to sell their business in MRT. And if that happens, who would buy that? Of course, it's going to be the government because it's losing money. And if it continues to lose money, and that's going to be unsustainable. So many unsustainable things. And then you hear Congress saying getting rid of the tax, the travel tax, which also doesn't make sense because we are already at a deficit, and then and then and then adding pressure, of course, to for our revenue collectors to find ways to be able to do so. But lots of them actually are spending very populist spending uh, that are not sustainable, uh, that are populous, unfortunately.
All right, next question we have from the audience. Someone's asking about BSP's interest rate decision. Although I think this will come out February 19th, that's next week.
Uh-huh.
Our audience is asking if is it possible or when would that be possible rate increase by the BSP?
Uh, that's a decision they have to make, although all signs point to because inflation is going to be below their target, and they are an inflation targeting institution. Uh, we'd like to think that the BSP would be dovish in terms of interest rates. Although it also depends on what they see would happen the next 12 months, because when they lower interest rates, they say, whether we believe or not, or we agree or not, they say that the lag in the effect on inflation would take up to 12 months. So it's a very long lag. So what they do also depends on what they see will happen the next 12 months. Although what we see the next 12 months is that inflation is going to be below their target.
Right, got that. Next question on government spending. You
Uh-huh.
mentioned a while ago that government spending is still at pandemic levels.
Uh-huh.
So where is that spending going now, and are these still temporary measures or already permanent parts of the budget?
It's again, these are, you have the uh ayuda for gasoline, and then you have silly uh, um, unconditional transfers, and then you have sometimes we have had many silly things, small silly things like uh, even sometimes free ride during Christmas in MRT. We don't know what, but those are small things, but they have cash flow implications. Everything, they're all famous, but they're just unsustainable.
Mm.
So it's across the board, and and then uh, then you have this notion that the government can solve the problem by sovereign wealth. So that's government running, being part of the economy. The government has no business being part of the economy. The government has its business is to uh, assure that the economy is, or to facilitate competition and in innovation in the economy. It should not be the solution.
All right, still on government spending. If government spending at this level isn't sustainable, how can we bring the budget back to a safer position without causing social unrest? And where can spending be adjusted while still protecting the poor and vulnerable?
That's why we said, I also said, three down, X to go. That means 3 years of mistake in public financing: 2022, 23, 22, 24, and 25. Uh, so it's the same. Luckily, we do have a uh, we do have a healthy economy, because it takes more than 3 years uh, to really drive down the economy. So it's the same mistakes of it's the same mistake. So imagine 1965. So we are now in 1968. So we have President Marcos Sr. doing the same mistake: 65, 66, 67, 68. So as if we are 68. The difference is President Marcos Sr. had 20 years to do that, which led to the collapse of the economy. Uh, Here, President Marcos Jr. has done it for 3 years, and hopefully he has. It's either he reverse course, they can reverse course, or uh, hopefully that ends after the term. That's only 6 years, and then the next administration hopefully will reverse course. It will result. It's going to be difficult, of course, to correct that, but we also have to acknowledge that whenever there is a crisis, for example, 1986, 1984, 85, 86. We also have to acknowledge, remind people that during the pandemic, when there is a crisis, it's the poor that actually suffers the most. And if we do this, if we don't learn from history and public finance, keep it. So it's 3 years, X to go. We don't know what that X, when that X is. Hopefully, we reverse course or we correct that before that X year, X number of years happens. Uh, it will be difficult, but we also have to remind people that when we go through a crisis, it's actually the poor people that suffer the most.
Okay, next questions here. What is your expected year-end inflation print and exchange rate with USD?
Uh, Inflation first. So that's two questions, two part of the question, inflation. Uh, so there, it will settle down next month. This month is 2.2%. Then it will slow down. And then barring any external cost, external shock, so the annual is going to be an average of 1.9%. Again, that is barring any external shock or barring any uh, aggressive interest policy rates cut of the BSP. Okay, the next question is, Ange, what's the second part of the question? Sorry.
Yeah, for the exchange rate, Philippine and US dollar for year-end.
Exchange rate, it's going to move sideways. Actually, there's even pressure for uh, so I did this February 4. It's now February 11. It's actually gone down. So we expected to move sideways. So the past 5 days, the peso has been appreciating. Uh, but then we are the 95% confidence interval is, so the 95% probability range is it will fall between 57.86 and 60.07. But 60.07 is on the tail end of the probability. It's not probably gonna happen.
All right. Also, someone's asking about maybe outlook for this year regarding impact of AI on Philippine exports.
AI, okay, we're doing, it's no longer, keep in mind, I'm using the term business process management, and that's what the industry players are using these days. It's no longer business process outsourcing per se because they are doing uh, high value added services for abroad. They're doing accounting services, they're doing uh, digital content creation. They're actually doing uh, uh, because of the disclosure agreement we're not seeing, but it is actually big. The animation that's being produced here in this country, we cannot just, but however, we cannot disclose to what company and how much because of disclosure agreements. So we are doing well. So basically, what's been doing is the business process management and IT industry. It's more of an RI, remote intelligence. It's intelligence working here remotely in the Philippines for other companies abroad. And these people are using AI. They are not slaves or AI, but they are users of AI. So we're doing well in terms of that.
All right, we have a couple more questions here regarding GDP or Philippines growth in general. First, what's the underlying assumption for saying that growth will pick up by the second half of this year?
It's a base effect. It's a base effect. So for example, uh, there. So the economy slowed down in the third quarter and fourth quarter of 2025. So the 3.4% and 4.3%, so there are very low growths, but they are growing in relation to the first quarter and second quarter of 2025. The economy slowed down in third quarter and fourth quarter of 2025. That means if the GDP is very low in the third and fourth quarter of 2025, then the same growth would have a base effect, and therefore it would have a higher growth by base effect on itself. It would have a higher growth of around 6.2 to 6.1%.
All right. Still on growth, with the expected modest growth of Philippine economy in 2026 and the high growth of the S&P the past decade, what percentage breakdown do you advise in terms of global-local ratio in an investment portfolio?
Oh, that's a good question that is best answered by our colleagues from First Metro Securities. I will yield
Uh,
I will yield to my colleagues on that.
I guess in terms of portfolio allocation, we did have this Traders Playbook event, I think January. You can go back to that webinar of ours. You can see that in our YouTube channel. There, we discussed about economic performance, market outlook, and our top picks for the year. So just head on to our YouTube channel if you want to get more color on that. Thanks for bringing that up, Doc Dumlao.
Okay,
Uh,
thanks.
Another question here on growth. What is the Philippines tax to GDP ratio as compared with other Asian countries and emerging markets? Do you have room to lower this ratio in order to address deficit?
Tax to GDP ratio, uh, I don't, I have what I have is there. It's around, it's around 16, 17%, close to 17%, which is low compared to other countries. Other countries around 20, 25%. But we also have to give credit to our revenue collectors because compared to, for example, Arroyo administration, Aquino, Duterte, past administrations, they have been lower. So it's been high this year in this administration. So we have to give credit for that. But what is really weird, what is really unexplainable is why this spending is still too much, and it's still as if we are in a pandemic. So yeah, we are low relative to others, but historically speaking, uh, our revenue collection is high historically.
All right. I guess since we're pressed for time, I'll go on to the last question for this session. Uh, Regarding employment, do we have a more nuanced view of employment? Meaning, what type of jobs are increasing? My concern here is that although headline number is high, the composition might be problematic.
Okay, so the loss is basically in construction, uh, and then the numbers are actually okay. The puzzle here is the unemployment rate is 4.4%. Uh, So, and then the underemployed is 3.9 million. And that's the big number. Actually, the actual question should, let me emphasize, is that why are the numbers too good to be true? Because they are too good to be true. They're less than that of the US and many OECD countries. Uh, so it's not problematic, but rather why is it too good? Why does it look too good to be true? And the reason for that is well, for one is the underemployment. Uh, if one actually works just for 1 hour, so this is what's the latest data, December. If one works for just 1 hour in December, that person will be classified as employed and will reduce the unemployment rate data. Okay. Uh, the other one is uh, our cash transfer system is unconditional, which means you don't have to be participating in the labor market to receive the ayuda. So that means that it lowers the participation rate, and if that lowers the participation rate, that lowers the unemployment rate. Whereas in other countries, the government transfer is unemployment benefit, not unconditional benefit, which means if it's unemployment benefit, you have to prove that you are unemployed. To be classified as unemployed, you have to prove that you are looking for a job. And therefore, the unemployment rate, so that they can actually receive the transfer, so that they can benefit, they have to participate in the labor force, and that increases the unemployment rate. And that would make, for example, unemployment rate 5.8%, which is now something that looks more realistic and at par with many countries elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you for giving color on that, Doc Dumlao. And yeah, I guess that concludes our quarterly economic briefing this afternoon. Again, thank you, Doc Dumlao, for your thorough and well-crafted presentation. Also, thank you to our audience for sending in your questions. We did have a live and engaging exchange during this Q&A session. We also extend our gratitude again to everyone who joined us today. Thank you for always coming in during our webinars. We do appreciate your attendance. Also, as a reminder, the views and opinions expressed in this webinar are those of ACERD and do not necessarily reflect those of First Metro Securities or the Metro Bank Group. Again, to help us improve the quality of our webinars, we kindly request for just 2 minutes of your time to fill out our feedback form for this session with ACERD. You may scan the QR code flashed on your screens. This special briefing with ACERD was proudly brought to you by First Metro Securities. Once again, I am your host, Ange Bahay. Thank you for being with us and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Trading on the go? Here's First MetroSec Go for you. Easily open your account today with this app. You can download the First MetroSec Go app through Play Store or App Store for free. If you already have it on your device, simply open the app and click Sign Up Now. Next, you need to create a user ID, read and agree to the terms, and provide these information. Once you're done, click the link on the email verification sent. Now, let's complete your account application. First, input your account information. Then, provide your user information. Next, accomplish the investor profile form. Almost there! Read and agree to the terms and conditions. Then click Agree. You will then receive your reference number through the app. Don't forget to save this number because you will need it for your initial deposit. Next, upload or take a photo of these requirements. 1 valid ID, 3 signatures on a piece of white paper, proof of address, and proof of bank account. If you're self-employed, there are additional requirements. Now let's fund your account. You can make your initial deposit through bills payment, online fund transfer, over-the-counter deposit, or remittance. The minimum 5,000 pesos or $100 can be used to invest in stocks, funds, and bonds. There is no maintaining balance required. Next, you will need to verify your identity. Simply take a photo of your ID and take a selfie. You're all set. An email confirmation will be sent to you in 2 to 3 business days. Happy trading! With First Metrosec, it's your future first.